Welcome to Honest Money, your best guide to financial freedom. I'm Warren Ingram, the author of a few best-selling books, and I'm also an award-winning financial planner, and I've helped thousands of people on their journey to financial freedom. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I am here to share my experience and the best ideas that I've learned, and I hope these ideas help you on your journey to financial freedom. Welcome to another episode of Honest Money. Today, we're really privileged, I think, to be able to invite Thando from Small Steps to Freedom on to join us. Thanks so much for joining.
It is a pleasure. I feel so honored to actually be on this podcast.
So we always watch your content with interest because I think you've got so much to tell people that's valuable. That I thought it would be great to get you on and talk about a topic now. But before we do, I just thought it would be great for you just to tell our listeners a little bit more about what you're doing.
So how I actually got into the personal finance space is that I stumbled on the FIRE movement. So that was my initial introduction into personal finance. So once I found FIRE, I really became obsessed with it. Like I was like, this is what I'm going to do. It makes complete sense. So why not? And then I actually started talking to people about like personal finance and like all the things that I was changing in my life, and ended up actually linking up with Frugal Local, who is the one who convinced me to actually start Small Steps to Freedom. So that's how Small Steps to Freedom actually kind of came to be. And we created like the YouTube channel, which is like the primary platform, and obviously reaching out to people a lot on Twitter.
Fantastic, and I think it's such a necessary gap in our country's kind of education. I'm not saying formal education, but just we've got generations of people that have never been part of kind of the formal financial system, and so to kind of get as much information out there from reliable people without an agenda who are not trying to sell a product or something is critical. And so I think it's great that you're doing it, and I hope you carry on.
Yeah, and actually, I just like speaking of like people who have like your best interest at heart. When I started with like the personal finance stuff, and I was really trying to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing, I actually met up with a financial advisor. I won't name the bank that I went to, but I spoke to one of their financial advisors. And now looking back at the things that he was saying and what he was suggesting with what I know now, I realized just how vulnerable you can be, if you don't have the right information when you get that advice. And I think that's a very big thing that like I'm really trying to make sure that people have enough information to at least understand what they're doing by themselves before they even reach out to a professional.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think we often feel intimidated as well by this person who's got a title, and we think, okay, well, they must know everything, and whatever they're telling us, we should just agree and don't ask questions because they must know. And the sad reality is that there are some fantastic advisors out there, but there's some shockers. And the more we know as clients, the more intelligent questions we can ask of them, the better the advice will be.
Exactly.
So I really thought today it would be great to talk about a topic which is close to my heart, which is investing in shares. And one of the questions that come up a lot from our listeners is, I'd love to start, but I don't have a lot of money, and how can I get going with a small amount of money on a monthly basis, or when I get a bit of savings. And so I thought, maybe you can just give us some background as to some ideas that people can follow.
Well, I think the first problem is we overthink it a lot. Like you find people, you talk to someone in January and they're saying that they want to actually start like investing. This is the year they start investing. And then you talk to them at the end of the year and they haven't started because they're still doing all of this research and they want to make sure that they have everything figured out before they actually take that initial step. And I think that's a big stumbling block, because like one of the biggest things with investing is the earlier you start, the better off you will be, right? And in terms of like how to start, I think you really have to take the tumble, to be honest, and take the first step. Obviously, you do want to make sure that you understand the investments that you're making. But once you actually have some skin in the game, you can actually start figuring out what you don't know and start filling out those gaps. If you don't start, then you never know what you don't know.
So the only way to there's one of those bank adverts that says you don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great. And
Exactly.
And I think you're right. If we're sitting here talking about financial freedom all the time, and people are listening to to podcasts, watching your YouTube, reading books, and actually never pulling the trigger to start actually saving and investing, then they'll be highly educated and on money in decades' time and still no richer than they were the day they started. I think you're right. And so let's say someone says, okay, I have money, I'm willing to open an account. I mean, are we talking about, do they need $100,000 to start? Can they start with $5,000? What's the sort of the number that they can use to get into the stock market?
And I think that's where actually the best news is actually about investing, is that you don't need a certain amount of money to start. You can start with like 10 Rand. I remember my first investment was actually, I started investing with 200 Rands a month. That was the amount that I could actually afford at that time. But then what you find is that once you start and you start with that small amount, as you make more money and you progress in your life and you make more income, you actually start adding on to what you're already investing. So it's about really building up that habit. So I'd say you don't need a lot of money to get started. You can get started with whatever amount that you can actually comfortably afford to invest without putting yourself in jeopardy. And then and then from there you can really start. Like if you think about platforms like Easy Equities, there's like fractional shares that you can buy. You can even invest in like livestock. There's a lot of different things that you can do to actually start your investment journey, even outside of the stock market, if that's something that you're interested in.
And I think that's talking about investing in livestock is such a brilliant example of compounding at work. When people say to me, explain compounding, I always say, well, you buy one cow, you buy one bull. Give them a bit of time, give them the right space and food and stuff, and watch. In a little bit of time, you'll have a calf, and there's your two cows have created another one, and that's compounding, right? And I think farming's such a great way to understand all markets, because eventually markets are seasonal, like farming is. You get bad luck, which takes you out. And if you're not careful and you haven't got provision for the bad rainy day, you can lose everything, and it's all the same. I mean, the money principles and the principles around farming are universal. And I think you can make a lot of mistakes if you don't know what you're doing, but with a bit of research you can actually get going. And I guess that's really your point, is stop talking about it and start doing it.
And there's just so much knowledge out there, especially if you do take the time to like look online. Especially, there's a lot of people sharing that knowledge on a day-to-day basis, not just in theory, but they also talk about the stuff that they're actually doing. So you can see that this person, this is what they're doing, this is how far it's gotten them, and then you can kind of start taking stuff from there. And like, I think research is key, and the internet is just a beautiful place to do that.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the time when we talk about shares, I think it's important for me to say that doesn't mean that if you know very little that you have to now go and buy only individual shares and become an expert stockbroker or fund manager. I mean, you could do it really simply. Buy in South Africa, buy something like the top 40 index as an exchange traded fund, and it's one thing. The reality is everything you need to know about it, we can tell you in a few seconds. It's the 40 biggest companies in the stock exchange. You don't have to decide what they are. The index decides that. If it needs to change, the index changes it. You just need to get going. And then the most important thing is you need to leave the money in there for at least 5 years or longer. Please don't expect that it's going to go up in price, by double over the next 6 months just because that's what Tesla did or what Bitcoin's doing at the moment. That's not stock market investing. Stock market investing is a long-term business that will make you good money if you're patient.
Exactly. And I think it's funny that you bring up cryptocurrencies, because a lot of people are kind of like jumping onto that bandwagon in a way, and a lot of them don't actually have the information needed to really understand what that technology does and how it fits in with the current economy. So I think that's also an interesting point to bring up, is like, if you don't understand something, just don't touch it.
Yeah, and I think often we see an investment opportunity as something that's already gone up in value a lot, and then we say to ourselves, well, we've got FOMO now. I've missed out on this thing, fear of missing out. So let me get in, and I don't want to miss out on when it doubles again. And that people just assume that if something's doubled once, it's definitely going to double again. And unfortunately, what happens usually is once it's doubled, it falls over. And so it catches a lot of people right at the end of that big tidal wave of market price, when it just goes up and up, and then we think, okay, this thing can never go down again. And so I'm not saying that for cryptos specifically. I'm saying it for all bubbles. I think all the time we get hyped up in investing. I learned a good comment from one of my favorite investors of all time, Charlie Munger, about in the last annual general meeting they did in 2021. He said, there are going to be about 400,000 people watching him talk about cryptocurrencies. And out of the 400,000, 398,000 will be really happy to hold cryptos, and 2,000 will think that it's going to fall over. So he's not going to talk about it because he doesn't want to upset the 398,000. And I'm starting to feel like that about cryptos, because it's not necessarily people who have knowledge and can do a calculation on the fundamental value of that, of a crypto. The answer is there isn't a fundamental value. And so, it becomes a belief in something that's going to go up, and they might well be right. We don't know. But for me, if you're going to make an investment and you can't do some kind of a calculation, I would rather avoid it and let other people, take that opportunity. It's not an opportunity for me.
I definitely have to agree with that. I have actually, this is like a little fun fact about me, but I have actually worked in the cryptocurrency industry. So I do have a level of knowledge, and in no way an expert. But even with the knowledge that I have and understanding that I have of cryptocurrencies, I still think, or for me personally in my finances and my goals, it still doesn't fit in. It's at this point, it's an uncharted territory when it comes to financial planning and integrating that with your financial plan. I think that for me is a bigger risk than I'm willing to take.
So on a nice little door opening for me to ask you a little bit about your journey around money and your history.
Okay. I've never been good with money. That's the first thing. So I've always liked having some level of financial independence. So I've always liked to be able to have money that's my own, that I've earned by myself. So in university, I did a lot of part-time jobs, and I actually did make quite a good income, especially for a university student. But if you were to ask me now what I did with that money, I have no idea. Even though it was a lot of money. So after I actually graduated and I actually started making way more money than I had in university, I realized that there wasn't a difference in terms of me running out of money at the end of the month. So here I was making a lot more money than I was before, but that gap still wasn't being filled somehow. And that's when I really realized that there was a problem, because being stressed at the end of the month, every month, just waiting for your paycheck was not the life that I wanted to live. And once I actually started picking up those red flags, I started to do research about how do you actually manage your money in a way that you can be sane and not necessarily worry about it every day. And at this point, it was never about financial independence. But while I was actually doing that research, that's when I came about and found FIRE. And when I found FIRE, I really fell in love with the entire concept, because I wanted that independence, that the independence part really appealed to me, the freedom of being able to choose what job you do at what point or what direction your life takes really appealed to me. So FIRE was what really got me started in terms of taking my personal finances seriously, because it gave me a goal to focus on. So once I had that goal, that everything else kind of fell into place. Cutting my expenses was not as hard, because in my head, I'm like, okay, I'm cutting down these expenses and this is why I'm doing it. There's a bigger picture that I'm trying to aim for here. And I think that's why I always talk about goals so much, because that's where I start in terms of my finances is, what is your goal? Then you work backwards from there. But the biggest things that I've done personally in my personal finances is I am very obsessed in terms of keeping my expenses as low as possible, reasonably low, so that I don't live a horrible life. But my expenses are significantly lower than most people. And outside of that, a very huge helper that I've really focused on in the past couple of years is increasing my income. So that's another very big part of personal finance, is you have to make the money in order to save and invest, right? So what I've done there is I ended up actually switching careers completely from what I was doing before I found fire, and then so that I could actually get the income that I wanted in a job that I actually liked. So I married the whole, this is the income I want, this is the industry I want to be in, what role can I actually do that I won't hate, essentially. So once I found that role, I essentially pivoted, I made sure that I got that job, and that really increased my income. And once you're really focused on your personal finances, you just keep finding all these different ways of making extra income to help you reach your goals. And that's what happened with me. So I started side hustles as well. And that has been really helpful in terms of just driving my goals and my journey. But definitely I would say increasing my income and lowering expenses is basically the focal point for in terms of my personal finances.
There is so many gems that you've just laid out there. And I think maybe just to highlight for me, the three that resonate with me so much is you have to find a reason to kind of make a trade-off. So if you wake up in the morning and you really feel like, just packing up and going on holiday, and that's not in line with your vision for your life, the reason not to spend that money on the credit card to pay for your holiday on credit card needs to be really good. And so to find those kind of goals and for me, like a personal vision that motivates me, I think is critical. So I resonate with that as well. And then I think also, just understanding that you're right, you have to earn some money to be able to save, but that doesn't mean that you need to increase your expenses as your earnings increase. And I think a lot of the time that's a mistake high income people make, is they go, I'm earning double than what I used to earn 5 years ago. I should be spending double and firstly for show and for go, and just missing out on the whole point of control your expenses, and you get to this financial freedom goal faster. For people that are listening, I just wanted to kind of, if they don't know what FIRE means, because it's not setting anything on fire, the financially independent retire early movement. And there is so much information online about it, and I think you're right. For a lot of people, especially people that maybe aren't in a work or in a job that they really enjoy, this is the most attractive thing. But what you need to understand is it does take a bit of work, it does take a bit of discipline and sacrifice, but absolutely worthwhile.
Yes, absolutely worthwhile. And I would really recommend, especially for like young working professionals out there, is look it up. You might find that it interests you and it sparks something in you, and you can actually start that journey. And because I think that's one of the biggest advantages that I've had in my journey, is that I found FIRE very early compared to most people that find the FIRE movement, because I found it right at the beginning of my career, and that gives you quite the advantage in terms of you actually start doing all the stuff that you need to do in order to achieve it much earlier. So I definitely would recommend anyone listening to this to at least look it up. It will spark something. It might not be like early retirement for you, but I definitely think everyone can benefit from financial independence.
So I know we're running out of time, and I have to ask you that one life lesson that you've learned now, knowing what you know today, what would you tell yourself, if you were just walking out of university?
I'd say think about your life holistically, because a mistake that I did was kind of what is the word again? Compartment, like what? It's like separating my life into
compartmentalizing.
Exactly, thank you. That word. But that's essentially what I did. I was separating, this is my work life, and this is my personal life, and this is my family life. But I wasn't necessarily thinking about my life holistically. And I think once you actually start thinking about your life holistically, then you actually are able to design it a lot more in a way that speaks to what you want. Because if you're just going to say, okay, I'm going to have my work life, and I'm going to climb the corporate ladder, and then I'm going to have my personal life, and I'm going to be connected to everyone in my relationships, things tend to suffer, because life is really about balance. So you really need to think about your life holistically. What do you want? What is the perfect day in your life? And then kind of work backwards from there to actually make it happen. And I think that's like the one piece of advice I would give my past self, to just think about things holistically, because once I actually started doing that, a lot, like making decisions was a lot more easier. I knew like the direction I was taking, and really taking control of my finances was a no-brainer after that point.
Unbelievable. I think I'm gonna leave it there. Thank you so much, Thando. I think for people that are looking for great content, You can find Thando at Small Steps to Freedom. I can't stress enough that what she's saying is really powerful stuff. So have a listen, have a watch, have a read, and take those first steps. Thanks so much for joining us.
It is a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Honest Money. If you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to me on Twitter. My handle is @WarrenIngram. Don't forget to subscribe. We're on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Chat soon.